Hey everyone, how's the audio coming through? Someone can give me a thumbs up.
Yep, it's clear and crisp.
I can't hear you, Satya.
Joining, yep. And we'll give the people to join. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Dave? Dave, can you hear me?
Satya, I can't hear you, but I think everyone else can. So I can just proceed.
Great. 1 second. So we'll start this session in just a couple of minutes. Hi, participants. You can, in fact, keep this dynamic. So between the sessions, you can always chat in the chat window. And as I said in the earlier session, you can always share your tips there. If you have any tips related to Salesforce, for instance, I can use console.dir to debug the objects in the JavaScript. When you're working with the Lightning Web Components, when you get the objects, like if you are making imperative calls, if you want to check the object data, whether it's in the array form or any object form, we can always print that in the console using console.dir. So let's give 1 more minute before people join. And you can share similar tips in the chat window if you have any. Okay, let's get started. You may not be interested in 100 things that really doesn't matter to you, but I'm sure you'll be excited about 3 things every Salesforce developer should know about MuleSoft. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, David Norris. David Norris is going to take us on a hands-on tour of MuleSoft Anypoint API today. David Norris is a rich technical expert and a developer advocate with MuleSoft. And as I said, he's going to take us through a journey today. So stay tuned. Let's get started. Let's welcome David Norris to start the session. Welcome, David Norris.
Awesome. We thumbs up to go?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully you're in the right session to learn 3 things every Salesforce developer should know about MuleSoft. Really, my objective from the next 45 minutes is just to get you comfortable with what the MuleSoft Anypoint platform is and really give you the resources to encourage you to go away and give it a go yourself. So by way of brief introduction, my name's Dave Norris. I'm a MuleSoft developer advocate. I've been with the company about 10 years and pride myself on understanding the breadth and depth of our platform. not only with internal certifications, but external ones too, and regularly speak at community events like this one. Quick reminder, don't make any purchasing decisions on any forward-looking statements I might make, only what's generally available. Okay, so the first thing I would really like every Salesforce developer should know is MuleSoft is uniquely positioned to support enterprise integration goals. So specifically, what do I mean by that? Well, I want to take you on a little bit of a journey first on what makes up the Salesforce platform and position what some of those goals and challenges are posed by integration. So the first thing we need to cover is 22 years ago, Salesforce was founded on customer relationship management. It's even in our stock ticker, CRM. And we created that new category of applications that run in the cloud. And many of our customers use the Lightning platform to run market-leading services like Sales and Service Cloud, Field Service, the industry clouds, all on top of the blue jigsaw piece in this diagram, the Lightning platform. And you can tell by the connectors into the gray box, which represents your enterprise, that APIs and capabilities exist to help you push data into the Lightning platform and pull data out of it. So things like Apex callouts and REST APIs. But fundamentally, it didn't help you send personalized marketing messages to customers. So to do that sort of sophisticated marketing campaigns, it requires a different technology stack. And it needs to be tailored to sending emails at things like Cyber Monday scale. So that's where Marketing Cloud came in, and that's a new piece of the platform. And marketing campaigns require their own data stores, because I'm now not talking about leads and opportunities, I'm talking about prospect lists. And this piece of the platform needs to run on a completely different technology stack, optimized for large transactional volumes of email, SMS, mobile push notifications, everything you need to send offers to customers. So integrating your marketing content with your enterprise applications also needs to be a capability. So there are a broad set of APIs and capabilities for some customers to then push prospect lists into Marketing Cloud and pull data out of Marketing Cloud. So we're now building up the wheel, the Customer 360 wheel that you see on a lot of our presentations, but we haven't covered off how do we engage with customers through digital storefronts, because that has to be optimized for B2C traffic. So that's where we acquired Demandware and has now become B2C Commerce Cloud. So that helps integrate products and pricing into an online storefront. Again, needs its own architecture, since digital storefronts need aggressive managed caching, content delivery networks, and they need to support mobile and web use cases. So since all of these jigsaw pieces can run individually, they also need robust APIs to support commerce use cases. Then we needed to think about how do we visualize data to be able to make informed decisions. So that's where we acquired Tableau as a recognized industry leader in analytics. So Tableau provides a way to bring together disparate data sources and visualize it, and then get those data-driven insights, like how do I increase my revenue? So Tableau has native connectors down at the bottom here into your enterprise, because it needs to, pull from data sources like spreadsheets, PDFs, to things like big data, like Cube and relational databases. Then we need to think about how do we leverage existing investments that customers have in modern programming languages and applications. So what if you have a website running on Ruby on Rails, or you have developer skill sets around Java or Go? That also needs to be part of the Customer 360 wheel, and that's where Heroku was acquired probably about 9 years ago. So custom applications in your enterprise, or net new ones, requiring the full elasticity of B2C scale, but still using those modern programming languages that developers are familiar with, like Go and Scala and Ruby. You can use Heroku and not only host those applications, but also their corresponding data services. So it's fully managed infrastructure that you can scale vertically and horizontally. So that also has APIs and capabilities to be able to get data in and out of not only Heroku, but also now looking at cross-cloud connectors to be able to play nicely with things like the Lightning platform. And then more recently, we acquired Slack. Again, I won't labor the point about Slack because most people are aware of what it does. So while Slack can operate independently, you now know from conferences like Dreamforce, we're now looking to unlock capabilities with Slack integrating with the various jigsaw pieces of the Customer 360 wheel, as well as Slack having capabilities to go directly into your enterprise if needed. So that was a digression very quickly, really to discuss where MuleSoft fits in, because if we have a broad set of APIs and capabilities, then our job's done, in theory. We have an all singing, all dancing Customer 360 platform, nearly. Because fundamentally, the problem is integration's hard. Salesforce has connectors like Marketing Cloud. If anyone's used Marketing Cloud and the Lightning platform, you'll know that there's a connector to link these two jigsaw pieces together. And that helps abstract developers away from the underlying complexities of APIs and addresses certain use cases like synchronizing contacts and prospects. But it doesn't address all use cases. So there'll be some use cases where you will require code to be able to go into cloud. On top of that, your enterprise will have data stores down here that will have very different schemas to all of the data stores in the Customer 360 platform. So integrating the gray box into the Customer 360 jigsaw puzzle requires you to transform messages and orchestrate the message flow between your enterprise and the platform. So what I thought I'd do is summarize, I guess, what I've learned on what do conversations with customers look like. And I've tried to distill it across any industry or size of business. What are the challenges that often come up and how would I summarize them? So customers tend to talk about integration goals and they start with themes. The three themes most customers talk about are microservices, container-based deployments, and event-driven architectures. And typically this is where you can play buzzword bingo, because most people would say we're moving towards a container-based microservice architecture, or we want to do an event-driven microservice architecture. Fundamentally, if you take the buzzwords out of the equation, what's underlying these themes are goals, because these architectural styles are actually addressing challenges. So microservices are really addressing the challenge of breaking up large applications into their own network, storage, and compute areas of the enterprise to address the challenge of giving autonomy to teams. Most teams, developers would lick their lips at the possibility of being able to pick the service in the languages that they want to use that best suit a task that they're given to do or a project. And microservices also improve the quality of the development because they make those applications independently deployable. So if I have a problem with my release, I limit the blast radius leaking out to other areas of the enterprise. The container-based architectures like Docker and orchestration frameworks like Kubernetes really are there to address the challenge of running things like microservices on any substrate. So Google, Azure, AWS, and scaling those applications with a high quality of service. And event-driven architecture styles are addressing the need to move from what's historically been a loosely coupled aspiration for integration to completely decouple applications. So the goal there is to improve interoperability and flexibility. So the next layer of conversation, after you get that far, is to move to the protocols needed across the enterprise to support those goals. So no one only does event-driven architectures, needing things like streaming support. You're also going to need REST, SOAP, RPC, and the goal is really to make use of those APIs as much as possible and reuse them. because really what you're looking to do is improve productivity and maintainability. And then the next layer of conversation typically goes to things that are needed to support their goals. So that's where they will talk about an API gateway. We'll need to enforce governance across our APIs to make sure that they're secure, and we'll need to monitor them and drive metrics that support effective operations. So that is really my positioning to say that's where MuleSoft fits in to that customer 360 wheel. It's the part of the jigsaw puzzle that is the unified solution that really gives you quite unique tools that you need to deploy, well, not only deploy, design, build, deploy, and run your integrations. And it supports different substrates. So you can have cloud-based, you can run it on Kubernetes, you can run it on premise, and gives you that governance for things like monitoring metrics. The other thing it allows you to do is break down a much larger piece of work into individual composable APIs that you can reuse. So fundamentally, MuleSoft was acquired because it meets a lot of the enterprise challenges that would apply across industry, across company size. I might pause there. If there are any questions, please type them in the chat window. I might not be able to hear the audio coming through from your end.
Participants, if you have any questions, you can ask your questions in the Q&A panel there. We'll share the questions with Dave, and he'll be able to answer the questions.
All right. Well, if you do have questions as we go, then please post them. Don't be shy.
You can go ahead, Davis.
All right. Let's move on to number 2. The second thing I'd love every Salesforce developer to know about MuleSoft is that it really supports the broadest set of integration patterns. Now, let me just frame what I think an integration pattern is. So for everyone to level set here, for patterns, I'll use Gregor Hope's and Bobby Wolf's Enterprise Integration Patterns book. That defines about 65 integration patterns, and they break integration down into 5 key components. The first one is endpoints, how an application is connected to a messaging system so it can send and receive messages. Then we go on to construction, how the data to be sent is going to be constructed. Then they talk about channels, so the patterns supported to submit and receive data. And they talk about routing, how you're going to get messages filtered and aggregated and routed to the right destination. And finally, translation. So how you're going to translate messages between endpoints, because as we've talked about, your enterprise databases are going to look very different to the destination data schemas. And then what they do is they then apply those industry patterns to build up an end-to-end integration. So you can have an event-driven consumer using the event message construction, using a message bus, and you're routing it using a scatter-gather pattern and doing message translation on the way. So I had a question from Himaja, if I'm pronouncing that right. Would it be possible to share the content as brief bullet points on the screen? So Himaja, you might have to help me out here. What do you mean by bullet points? Let me know, Himaja, I'll carry on. If there's anything I can do in the meantime, just summarize what you would like, and I'll try and meet your needs. So yes, so right at the end, Himaja, I'll summarize everything up for you. I'll give you the key takeaways so you can leave with just the condensed version of what you need to take home. So what I've tried to do here is really list the jigsaw pieces of the Salesforce platform as I see them. And then for each of those components that make up an integration pattern, list out how the applications are supporting an end-to-end integration. And you can see that a lot of our capabilities are great at pushing data into and getting data out of them. They have APIs and capabilities really designed to maximize value and accelerate project delivery. But most of them are not intended to be used to exchange messages in an enterprise. Because really to do that, I'm going to need some pretty sophisticated capabilities in terms of the channels that the product supports, the routing capabilities, and the translation capabilities. So MuleSoft provides that platform to support all of those initiatives in the bottom right-hand corner, where other parts of the Customer 360 jigsaw would struggle. So if you needed support for things like guaranteed delivery or complex routing or data transformations as part of your enterprise integration strategy, then MuleSoft's uniquely positioned in our Customer 360 platform to take care of it. So what I thought I'd do is look at a use case to highlight this. So let's look at a customer synchronization use case, because what I've done here is really hypothetically come up with a requirement to say, if I update a contact in the Lightning platform, so say Sales Cloud, I want to be able to convert the name to ASCII art. And not only that, I want to send the ASCII art version of my name to Slack, and in parallel, sync it with a Postgres database, which I'm using Heroku for. So if I was to summarize the integration patterns I want to use, it has to be really a publish subscribe pattern, because I want it to be event-based. And some of these services, like requesting ASCII art, is a third-party service, which uses a request reply synchronous pattern. And I'm going to have to route this to 2 destinations in parallel. So I'm going to use a scatter gather route. And of course, at each step, I'm going to have to translate the message that I get from Sales Cloud into something Slack understands and to something I can push into a Postgres database. So just out of interest, how many lines of Node.js code roughly do you think it takes to do a simple use case like that? If someone could have a go in the chat window and be brave.
Yeah, you can just type in the chat window. It will be helpful.
Sheree, 5 lines.
Yeah.
You need to work for me.
More to come in.
So I had a go at doing this in Node, and Chandan 80.
Wow.
So I had 540 lines of badly written Node.js code to do this. Because if you think about it, in order to subscribe to an event being driven from the Lightning platform, there are probably about 40 lines of code just to do the authentication, authorization, secure token storage, and error handling. And I'm going to have to multiply that by the number of destinations I'm going to. So I'll need code to do Postgres pushes, I'll need code to do Slack pushes, and I'll need to include node modules to do that with a scatter gather node module, because they need to be done in parallel. So in order to do all of that and get a minimum viable product was about 549 lines of code. If you don't believe me, you can try it for yourself. You'll find it's more complicated than you think. So when you get complexity like that, especially when you're starting to route and orchestrate between multiple systems, then it can get complicated quite quickly. So I decided to do the same thing in MuleSoft. How many lines of code did I need? About 2, arguably 0. Because fundamentally, the value proposition for MuleSoft is it has these pre-built connectors. So in Node, where I had multiple lines of code to authenticate, authorize, and store tokens, the connector would do all of that for me. So the boilerplate code, the thing that is taking up the 549 lines of code are that boilerplate authorization and authentication. Then you need to do an HTTP call out. So MuleSoft has a connector for that. Then you've got things like that's to get ASCII art version for the inbound payload from Salesforce. Then I need to simultaneously route the request to Slack. So MuleSoft has a Slack connector, as well as in parallel, because I don't want to wait for that to happen, in parallel, update a Postgres database. So Chandan has a good point here. Number of lines shouldn't matter for any application. So I guess, what you've got to think about is if I was to deploy the Node app and the 540 lines of code, my point to all the developers listening is that's fine unless you have to then deploy and maintain that code. Exactly. Anisha's point that it's a decreasing set of returns. The more lines of code you have, the maintainability. So the boilerplate code will definitely have that channed in, but in the plugin, you don't have to write any code for it to do it. That's the point. So it's like having stub classes generated for you, and the connectors are updated with every Salesforce release. So you just decide which version you want to include. Yeah, and to Hamaja's point, it's really the maintenance that takes a lot of effort. I think the writing the code part is often the easy bit, but then you have to deploy it somewhere. You have to just even decide where you're going to deploy it and maintain it. So what does that look like in MuleSoft if anyone's not seen MuleSoft? The reason I designed the slide like that is I'm really showing you the IDE that MuleSoft provides. And to Chandan's point, the plugins here, if I have a look at them. So for instance, if I wanted to subscribe to an Apache Kafka message, then I have operations I can perform here. So I can consume a message from Apache Kafka, and all I need to do is drag it onto my canvas. So in terms of the configuration I need to do, I just need to tell it some configuration parameters like where is Apache Kafka, what's the timeout, what topic should I be consuming. I don't have to write. So when I did this in Node, I'd have to use a Node module like Fay, and I'd have to handle the connection and the timeout properties myself. But the reason I did the slide like that is you can see here that largely it's pictorial if I just minimize this. So I can subscribe using a Salesforce connector. So over here, you can see there are a bunch of operations I can perform on Salesforce, from bulk API jobs to using standard create, read, edit, and delete operations. I can transform messages using an expression language designed specifically for converting things like XML to JSON. Again, to do that in Node is sometimes quite complicated. There's no real easy way of taking an XML schema and converting it to JSON. Even with the Node modules available on the market, there are always edge cases that you have to code around. So I can now transform the inbound message from Salesforce, do a HTTP request to get the ASCII art, and then use, again, routes. If you were to do this in Java, you might use the scatter gather node module. But in MuleSoft terminology, I have flow controls like first successful, choice, round robin, and in this case, scatter gather. So it's going to execute these two routes in parallel. So you can see, just like our slide, one route is going to send the message to Slack, and one route is going to update Postgres. So to demonstrate it, I've got Sales Cloud on the left. I've got a Postgres database in the bottom right that I'm querying, and Slack in the top right. Again, I've tried to keep it mimicking the slide as much as possible. So right now, the Postgres database is in sync with Salesforce. I've got Rachel Developer. I've got Rachel Developer in Sales Cloud. And if this works, what it's going to do is when I update the name, it's going to get the ASCII art, post it to Slack, and then update the Postgres database. So if we update Rachel's last name to Smith, save the record. Wait with bated breath. We've now got the ASCII art version of Rachel's surname posted in Slack. And if I requery the Postgres database, the last name gets updated to Smith. So the Slack ASCII art's just a bit of fun, really just highlighting that as soon as you go beyond a simple use case, which is one destination to multiple destinations, and you need to factor in translation and routing, then MuleSoft is often a better proposition, given what we've talked about here around maintenance. All right. Number 3. So number 3 is all about reuse, because again, the conversations around what's easier to maintain. I think most people would agree if you've written things once that you should reuse them. So by looking at APIs as products, we should be able to implement them in a way that means the whole organization I work for is able to discover them, test them, and implement stuff that we've already developed. So this really is ultimately is around increasing speed to deliver projects with better quality. So to do that, let's just take a brief segue into the Anypoint platform. Now, I don't have a lot of time to walk you through this, but I think there are a couple of things I can show you that will hopefully resonate with the audience, that if you're going to create APIs to support the use case we've just been through, then you probably want to do that with an API specification. So what you want to do is agree that if I'm going to call out to an ASCII art service, what should the specification be? So in MuleSoft, I can, if you're not familiar with Open API Spec, OAS or RAML, you can actually use a wizard that guides you through the process. So there are heaps of online tutorials that cover those in detail. And if you're familiar with those protocols and frameworks, then you can actually edit the YAML files and properties files directly. So here is where I can create an ASCII art of Days API. I can specify the protocols that I want to support. I can include the resources that this API is going to need. So I'm going to need a resource called ASCII art. That's the endpoint I want to create. And if I want to give people the ability to send a bit of text to me to convert, I'm going to need to add a body. I might want it to be in JSON format, and I can specify the data types. And what you'll see on the right-hand side as I'm doing this is it's building up an API specification for me in RAML and in parallel Open API Spec. And it's doing this behind the scenes for me so that what I'm eventually going to do, once I'm happy that I've got something that someone can call and they understand the schema and the responses I'm going to give, then I can publish this. And I'm going to publish it to something MuleSoft calls Exchange, not to be confused with Salesforce's App Exchange. And what Exchange is a bunch of assets that everyone in my organization can see and search for. So if someone also wants to do ASCII art, they can search all the assets they have access to. They can discover something that may have already been created. They can go and have a look at some documentation. And they can see the endpoints. So there's a post to ASCII art. And I can even test this by sending in a test message and getting a response, which is the ASCII art version. I've done all of this without actually writing the API implementation yet. This is just a sample message of what a developer could expect to receive from my new API. So by doing this, I've now got an endpoint, a mocking service endpoint I can now give to developers, and they can start using this without me having building the implementation of it. And then to implement it, all I would need to do in my IDE is create a new Mule project. And I have the option to import a published API from Exchange. So what this does is it searches the same repository of assets. It finds an ASCII API that I've just looked at. because it meets my need. This is now me as a developer implementing the logic needed to execute this flow. So what this is doing is it's taking the definition I've just created and automatically scaffolding the code that I need to implement it. And this is what it looks like. It creates a bunch of listeners, some default placeholders for transforming messages for error handling. And here is my post ASCII endpoint ready for me to build up a flow in this section here that would look like this. So I've done that as a roundabout way of saying that's a really important step, because to take this conversation further, you need to start thinking about how you break down your APIs into something that's composable. Because remember, one of the goals of enterprises is to try and independently deploy things and limit blast radius. So ultimately, what I should do with the change data capture event that's being fired by Sales Cloud is create APIs that just operate on a data source. So I'd have an API that did the create, read, edit, delete on the Postgres database. I'd have an API that did perhaps post message, delete message, create channel in Slack. And then I'd have one that does the call out to the ASCII art service. So just like most development mentalities, this is encapsulating the logic just needed to expose the data. They don't do anything else. Then, because this change data capture event needed to orchestrate between all of them, it needed to update Postgres, it needed to post to Slack, and it needed to call out to the ASCII art service. I'd have an API to do the orchestration. Now, the reason this is important is, what if we have another project come along? So let's assume we now need a / command in Slack, because someone saw what we did for the change data capture event and said, why limit ASCII art to just having to change someone's name in Salesforce? Why not give me a / command directly in Slack where I can pass in some text? So if I've broken my APIs down like this, I no longer need to worry about the API that's operating on Slack, because I've already created it on a previous project. I published it to Exchange so other people can view it and test it, try it out, see if it meets their needs, give feedback to the team. Ultimately, all I need to do is create a new orchestration API, because I don't need to go to Postgres now. I just need to convert it to ASCII art and then post to Slack. So what that looks like, if we're in the Salesforce op channel, implementing like this gives me access to an ASCII / command where I can specify any text I want, pulls out to ASCII art, writes back to Slack. So by taking that layered approach, I've saved myself some time, because if this was written well and robust, then all I need to do is the orchestration part. The API at the top is really saying if I'm responding back as part of a request reply pattern, then I need to make sure that the format I'm giving back to Slack is in the format that it expects, which will be different to Sales Cloud. So Slack has the concept of blocks to build up a user interface. So I'd put that logic, the transformations needed into this API. Again, the reason we do that is because you'll get another requirement come along. This time, why limit it to / commands and change data capture events? Why don't we have something on the user interface that leverages one of these APIs? So can I just create a bit of user interface in Sales Cloud that will just convert some text to ASCII art and give it back to me? So in this case, because I've already created the ASCII art service, all I need to do is be able to consume it somehow in the Lightning platform, and I'd be able to leverage the existing development I've already done. So what does that look like? So in the last release, we're trying to introduce features that, again, make it much easier to consume MuleSoft APIs from Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, anything on the Lightning platform. And there was already an existing feature called external services, where I could create a new external service and I could import an open API spec. So we already know, because we had a look at it when we were creating the API, MuleSoft was building the open API spec for me. I could have copied that into Salesforce, but users were finding it quite error prone and wasn't really obvious which version of the API I was using. So now in a developer org, if you go in and create a new external service, you now have the option to select as an API source the MuleSoft Anypoint platform. So you still have the option to manually import it, but now you have an additional option to use MuleSoft's Anypoint platform. I need to set up some credentials, so how it's going to connect to my MuleSoft Anypoint platform instance. And you can see what it's doing here is it's querying the exchange in Anypoint for any APIs I have access to. So maybe I wanted to use the external services to use a weather API that's already been developed. So in our case, we want the ASCII API, and you can see that it's every version that's been published is available. So I don't have to use the latest one if I don't want to. You give it a name, a description, and then the named credential it will use to authenticate and authorize with that service. So all this is doing is looking at the OAS spec and telling me all of the operations. These are the resources on the API spec that I can use. So if I had more than one, I'd see them all here, and I could select which resources I wanted to import. And you can see here, it gives me a summary that this API has an input parameter called body of type object, and it gives me an object back when it's successful. So we're trying to make it as simple to use as possible. And now you can reuse the investments in MuleSoft directly in Sales Cloud with external services. So in order to use that, then we would use something like ASCII Apex Actions. So this is a super simple flow that has a screen that's going to ask me for some text to convert. It's going to then assign the input value, which is the text I typed into the text box. And then it's going to use Apex Actions. So these are the stub Apex classes that are automatically created for you to be able to decide what's the input you're going to send, and then where you're going to store the output you get from this API call. Then you can decide what you do with it. In this case, I am going to just update the contact record it came from. So we've created a field to store the value that's coming back from that call out. So if we edit the page of a contact, and I drag a flow component onto the page, make sure it's on the flow that I've just shown you, ASCII text creator. And because I'm going to eventually update this record, I'll just need to pass the record ID into a variable that I'm using to run that update operation. Save it, navigate back to the page layout. So what I've got here is a field here called ASCII output. So that's the field that is going to be written back to at the end of the flow. So if I use my favorite dog's name, Pippa, hit the convert button, calls out to the existing MuleSoft API and puts the ASCII output into a field in Sales Cloud. Any questions on reusability? So I hope I'm presenting this in a way that you've perhaps not seen before.
If you have any questions,
Got
you
a
can
few minutes
post your
left, so
questions
we can
on.
wrap up if there aren't any questions.
Yeah, we are almost on time. I think they have has some problem with the audio. He'll not be able to hear us. So if you have any questions, please post your questions in Q&A pane. I have one question, Dave. Do you have any guidance or strategies on strategies or best practices that can be adopted for orchestration?
So any guidance or on strategies or best practices that can be adopted for orchestration? So ideally, what you should be doing is when you break down a problem into its constituent parts, is really what you're trying to identify is there any value in separating out something at the bottom here that's operating on a data source? If you ever need to go across multiple data sources, then that's when you should create an API to do the orchestration. And I hopefully made sense when we looked at Anypoint Studio, using the existing MuleSoft flow controls to then do the orchestration for you, because you can then add in error handling. So most APIs would have some form of flow control, because you may want to do things like build in resiliency. So again, if you're trying to code this in Node, doing things like first successful is pretty difficult, because really what first successful is saying is I'll operate multiple routes one at a time until one of them is successful. The first one that's successful I can end. So if I have multiple APIs perhaps deployed to different regions, and one of the regions goes down in AWS, I've got a backup plan. So I would say if you're going to multiple data sources, you should think about. Shireen, love your question. I've got some great resources I can share with you just coming up. So just to recap, if you ever look at the MuleSoft documentation, they talk about system, process, and experience APIs. Really what I've shown you is exactly that. We created system APIs to access the data. Process APIs are really that layer of orchestration where I needed to call multiple sources. And I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to have one API, because by splitting it, I can reuse the APIs more easily. So when external services came in, I didn't have orchestration in this API that perhaps would have excluded me from using it, because maybe I didn't want to post to Slack and I didn't want to go to Postgres. So experience, process, and system APIs are really the layering terminology to follow that best practice. So Shireen, to answer your question, 3 things I would recommend. So everyone's part of a community here, I'm sure, either going to Trailblazer community events or MuleSoft community events or Slack community events or Tableau community events. Find a meetup near you. It's a great way to go along and just listen to the community and what they're doing. They talk about some really interesting use cases, not just in the Salesforce ecosystem, but beyond. Shireen, I recommend you go and do something I've shown you today, build your own API in 10 minutes. So I'll make sure Satya has all of these links, and I'm happy to share the deck. But if you go to developer.mulesoft.com, you can do that yourself, guide you through it step by step. And if you want to take it a step further than what you can cover in 45 minutes, then there are free self-paced courses. So I think it's 4-day instructor-led courses have now been made available online for free. So you can study it in your own time and have access to all of the documentation. So I did promise one more thing, bullet points to summarize everything. So I think someone had a question earlier, Himaja.
Yes.
So from what you've seen today, MuleSoft's going to support independently deployable, reusable APIs that can be deployed on different substrates, and supports event-driven patterns. So it supports broadly those integration goals. If you want the broadest support for a number of industry patterns across pub/sub, async APIs, REST, SOAP, and others, with a suite of tools to make building it easy, and we've sort of scratched the surface today, then MuleSoft has that broad support for industry patterns. And we've demonstrated today with a very simple use case that you can do reuse with pre-built templates. So we have implementation methodologies to maximize that productivity.
It was a great session, Dave.
That would be my
It's
summary.
amazing. Yep. Thank you for sharing that last slide. So I don't know whether you have created instantly, but yeah, or you already have that. You read the minds of developers. Thank you so much for that session. And yeah, there are little questions because everyone, I believe, has understood the session pretty well, and it covered almost all the things that a developer should know to get started with the MuleSoft Anypoint platform. And yeah, because you cannot hear us probably. I'm just putting a message here. It's a fantastic session. Thank you, Dave. Cool. So, yeah, it's not completed. Our day is still on. We have a fun activity that is coming up. So let's give a couple of minutes for people to join the fun activity. For that part, you'll have to do is you'll have to leave this session and join the other session from the sessions tab on the left side. So I request you all to leave this session and then join the other session, the fun game session in the sessions tab, where we are going to play a game which is totally built using LWC components, and the game will be really interesting. So let's join there.